lot of American technology firms have struggled to crack the China market. And most famously, Google has withdrawn. Uber, the ride-sharing firm, sold its share to a local partner and left the market. There's a long list, goes on and on. Amazon seems to be more conservative. eBay is gone, so on and so forth. However, Airbnb, the home-sharing app, is still in China and still seems to be doing quite well. Sharon, how well exactly? Can you tell us what Airbnb's market position is in China right now?
Right, so I think Airbnb is doing considerably well vis-a-vis some other, internet giants from America that you mentioned. In 2017, it had upwards of 120,000 flats available, and also, according to one commonly used kind of tourism metric, retail RSP, it also has had almost a 9% kind of market share. And so it's fared better than, in terms of market share, than some of the local competitors, which include Ctrip-backed Tujia and also Xiaoju, which are homegrown.
And it's also got like this interesting thing in that it's got a value proposition for Chinese travelers overseas, which is interesting, right? So unlike Tujia and Xiaoju, which are mostly domestic plays, Airbnb can book Chinese travelers who are going to France or the States or wherever.
Right.
And that also seems to be an advantage.
Right, so I think that's one of the biggest selling points that they've mentioned a lot is what they call the so-called network effect. So this idea that, people who, outbound travelers from China who go abroad then actually come back to China and then serve as hosts or vice versa as guests. And so I do think that it has kind of that global advantage that their competitors might not necessarily have.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're tapping into another trend in China. You can tell me a little bit about it, but there's this the growth of the short-term rental market and the overall policy push to get Chinese people to rent out apartments more. I mean, how harmonized is Airbnb with the government's policy on this front?
Right, I think that's a really good word. I think one thing that it is doing well is that it is quite harmonious in that a lot of the actual community-centric kind of business model that Airbnb is touting actually dovetails really well with Beijing's interests. That is to say that they're trying to reduce a glut of unaffordable housing. They're trying to make sure that there are people who are living in these places. I mean, Xi Jinping famously said that houses are made for inhabiting and not for speculation. So in that sense, Airbnb is all about inviting guests over and having that kind of promoting that kind of like a harmonious lifestyle.
And they share data with the government, presumably.
Right, so they partner with a lot of municipal governments and also, actively share and disclose host and guest information. A lot of the data is also stored locally in China, so it is doing a lot to kind of make sure that it is, making the right calls respect to following regulations in China.
All right, well, so far so good. I mean, so 9% of the market, you've got these big, well-funded competitors who are local at least. Do you think it makes sense, assuming Airbnb doesn't fall afoul of the regulators in some other way or the trade war, which I guess is always a risk, or maybe because of this risk, that they would partner with one of these guys, or merge or acquire or some sort of activity like that? Is that feasible, you think?
So I think, as you mentioned earlier, Uber pulled out earlier when it was in China. So Airbnb shouldn't necessarily do the same thing. I think that it could really cash in on the tourism boom if it did partner with some of the domestic incumbents, like you said, and instead of kind of burning cash and just continuing kind of to peel. But I do think it does have a certain amount of leverage. And one thing I didn't mention before is I think that the social credit aspect of it is there's also a social credit element that's interesting.
Well, you're talking about the government's kind of rating. Well, it's a very confusing sort of rating system for individuals, but okay, so that data would feed into how the government tracks people's behavior economically.
Exactly, and I think the peer kind of reviewed.
So if you go into an Airbnb apartment and raise hell and do terrible things, like that will show up and they go, okay.
So it kind of helps with developing that viable credit system.
Right, well, I buy that. I guess we'll see what happens next year. It's probably going to be a tough one for American businesses, but they do seem to have a little bit of a competitive advantage there. Thanks for talking. Thanks for watching, everybody.